Mr. Vice President, members of the board, thank you for the opportunity to allow us to give you an update tonight on our SRO program here in Chandler Unified. The heavy lift today actually is going to be with our team, with our Executive Director, Ken James, our Director of Safety, Mark Hewish, and one of our SROs that's at Chandler High School, and that is Officer Dew, who brings a lot of background as it relates to the SROs within the state because of the different involvement he has had at not just in the city level, but at the state level as it relates to SROs. And so it's nice to have him here with us this evening to be able to share his perspective. So with that, as we go through, you might have some questions as we go. If we need to stop, we'll go ahead and do that. I know that we have about an hour because we have another presentation after that. So we're going to try and get to the content for you and then give you an opportunity to ask some questions, because it's been some time since we've been before you to kind of share what we do with our SROs and what's happening on our campus. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Ken James.
Thank you, Dr. Gilbert. Mr. Vice President and members of the board, thanks for this opportunity to discuss our SRO program. And the nice thing is we have experts going to be talking to you. Mr. Hewish was the sergeant over the SROs in Phoenix while he was there. And then Steve Dew, as Dr. Gilbert said, is one of our SROs, but he also is the vice president of the state association for the SROs, and he's also does the training for Arizona Department of Education when districts are doing that. So you're going to hear from very knowledgeable people. I'm not included in that group all the time, so I'll let them. Okay, but as I go through our PowerPoint, what we're going to really focus on is the SRO program here in Chandler. And want you to hear the relationship that we have with the Chandler PD. What you have on your first slide, this is the Arizona Department of Education information. This is what they put out. And it's been this way for several years because what they've put out in our minds is very adequate. This started back in 1994, and the purpose of this, placing school resource officers on school grounds to contribute to safe school environments that are conducive to teaching and learning. I know when I started back in the 80s, you didn't see police officers at campus. If you did, people thought, okay, there's issues at that school. And so it's completely different now around the country. Okay. We want the officers, and this is part of their mission, to maintain visible presence on campus. They're a resource for the school, for the community. And the other part that they really do is the law-related education, the instruction and training that goes to the students and staff. So we utilize them for that. We want it to be a proactive, prevention-based program. And so what we have here in Chandler is a really good working relationship with Chandler PD. Next slide. The goals, again, these were established by ADE, and we believe these goals are appropriate for all of us, for all of our schools here in Chandler. And I don't think you can argue the fact that we want orderly, purposeful atmosphere at all of our schools. And we would like our students and staff, and we're talking about all students and staff, to feel safe. And between our relationship with the schools, or with the Chandler PD and the schools, that's one of our goals, is to make sure that everybody feels safe. And we'd like them to have a positive view of the SROs. And we're going to get into this a little bit later. I know Officer Dew will present this, but the one thing that we preached on many, many times is the officers, the SROs, are not security guards. They're not the disciplinarian. Okay? We emphasize that. Okay, so now I'm going to turn this over to Mr. Hewish and let him talk about our specific schools, where the SROs are, and also about the grant that it takes to get these officers here.
Okay, thank you, Ken. Okay, the Chandler Unified School District has 11 schools that have SROs currently serving on those campuses. And during legislative sessions, the legislators get together and decide what they need in order to fortify our safety program. And we were fortunate enough to be able to benefit and have, like I said, 11 SROs at our campuses. And as you can see right there, those are the campuses we have, both the middle schools, junior highs, and high schools. Okay, Gilbert and Queen Creek, they have an SRO at Payne Junior High School, Perry High School, and then Queen Creek at Castile High School. Okay, the following campuses, however, so out of those 11, we only have grants for the following campuses. And again, when the last legislative session ended about 3 years ago, they had enough money to provide us with SROs at these campuses. ACP High School and the ACP Middle School, however, they split one SRO. And the reason for that is the grant cycle of 21 through 23 had already ended. The awards were given out before the ACP High School was completed. And so when the high school was built, they went ahead and allowed for us to have one SRO at both campuses. We have Officer Basil. He spends the 1 day at ACP Middle School on Fridays, and then he spends Monday through Thursday at the ACP High School. Okay, what does the grants do for us? So the last legislative session, there was some money left over, and the state sent out information saying there was $50 million that was available. And what they did was the campuses or the school districts that already had paperwork filled out and were awarded some positions. We are very fortunate to be able to get one for Payne Junior High, one for Santan Junior High, and the one for Bashan, one for Perry. This amount is $900,000 in additional funding. Prior to this, we've had SROs at these campuses. However, with Gilbert Police Department, they've paid the full amount of salary and benefits to their officers serving in our Gilbert campuses. With Basha and Perry, the Chandler Police Department was splitting halvesies with us. So they paid for half, we paid for the other half, the school district did. And so this additional $900,000 in funding is fantastic. And we're very fortunate that we already had the paperwork turned in so that when they were giving out these additional awards, we were able to receive 4. The overall amount of money from January of 21 through the end of the cycle of July 2023, we will have received over $5 million in grant funding. So again, this money that we get through the grants is wonderful. And it allows us to have these SROs to be role models in the schools for the students. Currently, Anderson Junior High, they will be the only one that does not have grant funding. And so again, with Anderson, Chandler Police Department will pay half, and the Chandler Unified School District will pay the other half. Okay, so the state SRO grant, they run for 3 years. So come January, I'll be busy putting together paperwork so that we can reach out.
Hey, Joel, I think you may want to put your mute on your phone.
Yeah, I'm trying to figure out something here in my car. I apologize.
Okay.
Okay. So, and so come January, we'll start the paperwork because it has to be turned in by July so that we can ask for SROs for all of our secondary schools. And that will be for another 3 years. And that will run from July of 23 through July of 26. And so again, this money is very important for us to continue to conduct business at our campuses with our SROs as partners, especially with our Chandler Police Department. Okay, so now I'd like to turn the time over to Officer Stephen Dew, who is our SRO at the Chandler School District, so that he can continue providing information reference to SRO program.
Thanks, Mark. Vice President, members of the board, thank you for having me here today. It is great to be here. A little 30-second background on me. I had the opportunity to work as a school resource officer for the last 14, we're going on 15 years. Been with Chandler PD for 18 years. Been a trainer for the state for the last, we're going on 11 years now. Had the chance to be an SRO in the Kyrene district at a middle school, in the Mesa district at Summit Academy, which is a kindergarten through 8th grade, and finally made it to Chandler High, where I've really always wanted to be. So I've really enjoyed being there. The program is a prevention-based program. And we have noted at the top here, the Arizona Department of Education and lawforkids.org website. To explain that a little bit more, the Arizona Department of Education facilitates the school safety program and the grant funding associated with it. It wasn't until about 6 years ago when social workers and counselors were added to that grant funding. Before that, it was all school resource officers. I find this to be such a benefit because one of the staple components of having an effective school policing program is that multidisciplinary approach. Having that school safety assessment and prevention team, all the stakeholders involved, evaluating what needs to happen on the campus and moving forward from there. What would be best for the youth on that campus? What would be best for that school community? And the Department of Education has the training arm assigned to the Arizona Foundation for Legal Services and Education. This is the community outreach arm for the Arizona State Bar. And the website that they utilize is lawforkids.org. So that is the website that officers will go to be able to find law-related education. And some of these things up here are things that are approved through the Arizona Department of Education and some examples of training. And we can go in an hour of detail as to what that training looks like. But specifically here in Chandler, I want to let you know what our school resource officers are doing in regards to training. They are crisis intervention team trained. And this is a statewide initiative that these little pins that we wear, we've been through training that provides us de-escalation techniques, skills, resources, an understanding of how to deal with individuals that may be in some type of crisis. It's very, very beneficial training to have, and all of our SROs have that training. In addition to that, our SROs have gone through youth mental health first aid. I thought that program was so great, I became an instructor myself. And I know that that is something that is offered here at the district by other individuals. The algae model, for those of you that may be familiar with that, is a wonderful tool to reach back to and to utilize. Some other things, we have the Thrive program that we have officers who are certified in teaching that, and that is actually happening within the district. And it's been very effective at the junior high level. They also are required to have yearly advanced officer training in areas, and this is specific to Chandler, such as emotional intelligence, 21st century policing, and what procedural justice looks like in any environment that you're in. In addition to that, ethics and bias-based policing, and another one, mindfulness. Mindfulness. That's something that was kind of a fun training that we had this past year to help officers with their, I think it's an improvement in their emotional intelligence. Some other things that we look at, I could go on and on about various awards and accolades that we've been able to achieve, but overall, we are a model school resource officer program. We've been awarded such nationally, and we continue to be recognized as that model agency. We have officers who have been recognized as law-related education officers of the year through the Arizona Department of Education. And one minor adjustment that is a national term that's used sometimes is you see in the middle sentence here, the triad describes an SRO's role as mentor, guest lecturer. Now that guest lecturer, that is something that doesn't quite fit here in Arizona. The Department of Education, the school safety program, emphasizes best practices when it comes to evidence-based, student-centered, interactive strategies. Those best practices that you see an outstanding teacher might use in a classroom. That's what officers are trained in doing. And when an officer is in a classroom, one of those requirements is that there is a teacher there, and the ideal model is that it's a team teaching event. Little nuances. Then some of our roles and duties, it's more than just what we see on the screen. So much more. I just wanted to point out something from our IGA, our intergovernmental agreement that we have between us, between the Chandler Police Department and the Chandler School District, as an example of our role. Prevention is the center focus of the program. It is essential for an SRO to be a positive role model at all times. Because the SRO is constantly in view of students, he or she has the unique opportunity to form lasting impressions and attitudes with an emphasis on building positive relationships. The SRO shall set an example by positively modeling how to handle stress, resolve conflict, and celebrate success. The SRO shall encourage responsibility by helping students think through options and consequences of decisions. The SRO shall foster positive relationships with all students and school community members in a manner that promotes a positive image of law enforcement. The SRO shall serve as a protective factor for students by conducting themselves as a neutral, approachable adult, positive representative authority, and community resource member. From experience, I can tell you that the most positive relationships take place during non-enforcement activities. And I can tell you from personal experience that those young people who might have hit a road bump along the way, might have made mistakes, of whom I've been able to assist through that process. I knew, for example, if someone did something that resulted in a referral or resulted in some type of legal consequences because there was a willing victim, I knew that I was going to see that young person again. And I can say from personal experience that building positive relationships is the equity that helps those young people recognize that there are approachable adults in their life. It's the equity that helps them understand how to have a positive relationship with an authority figure in their life. And now that I'm at Chandler High, after being at some of the junior highs and interacting with students, it is such a joy to see those students whom I've built that equity with and who come back to campus, who have been successful. And that is the ultimate reward, because being a school resource officer in the city of Chandler is the most proactive thing you could possibly do. And the positive impact that our SROs have with each individual youth has a ripple effect, a positive ripple effect. And this is the part where I gotta slow down a little bit so I don't take up too much of your time. We also help out with emergency procedures and recommendations. We've had really good success, especially helping out with the elementaries and some of their emergency procedures and being able to collaborate, not only at the schools that we're assigned to, but the feeder schools that our youth are coming from. And I think I've covered a lot of these things that we encourage an officer to be. I just refer back to what we've established already. And gathering data is so important. Here's a plug for the board. This upcoming year is the grant renewal process. And so it's extremely valuable that we review, that we survey, that we analyze how are our school resource officers doing within our communities. Data should be gathered, anecdotal data, surveys from parents, students, staff, the community, surveys about their law-related education, surveys about their interactions with school resource officers. Because the school safety program is a competitive grant. And as we know in previous years, we haven't had the available funding, and that has actually resulted in having to provide funds at schools that we really felt we needed school resource officers at. So it's a crucial transition that we're coming up on. Then we'll move on to some of the grant requirements that you may already be aware of. We're asked to be on campus 80% of our on-duty time. We are asked to teach 180 hours of curriculum. Within those 180 hours, there is 80 that is designated as cohort instruction, meaning we've been asked to teach 6 law-related education lessons that build upon each other. And what determines these lessons is based on the School Safety Assessment and Prevention Team. That team that is asked to meet quarterly, but we find it beneficial to meet at least monthly. Some schools even do it weekly. And they perform needs assessments. What is happening on campus that our officer may be able to share? And this law-related education is the curriculum is provided through the Department of Education. So it's that evidence-based curriculum that the Arizona Foundation for Legal Services provides through that Law for Kids website that I'd mentioned previously. And let's see, some additional training is required yearly at advanced LRE so that the officer can continue to, sharpen the tools that they have and be more skilled in their application of the school safety program. Within the community, what a good school resource officer looks like is really dependent on that individual. And as I go about and provide training across the state and look at new school resource officers that are just bright-eyed and bushy-tailed is what I refer to it as, that they need to figure out the kind of officer that they are. Do they have a hobby or a sport? We've had wonderful, successful SROs within the Chandler district be part of the Dungeons and Dragons Club. Currently, we have a couple officers participating in the mountain bike clubs. I pop into the choir room and I sing with the choir every once in a while. It's unique things that make you a part of that community. I've had the benefit and blessing of being a parent here in the Chandler School District and being able to have that stake, have that investment, have that equity that motivates me to be a positive influence and to treat youth the same way that I would want my own child to be treated by all adults as well as the school resource officer that may be on their campus. It's important to participate in these extracurricular activities. Again, it's a prevention-based program, and the most powerful relationships can be established through non-enforcement activities. Now, making changes to the grant is actually important, and it would take a legislative change to adjust some of these things. So if there's things that we see within the Chandler district that we would like to improve, do we feel like the officers need to teach more hours or less hours or change the time that they are required to be on campus? These are things that would have to go through the legislative process. And with that, the Department of Education is required to report back to the state legislature on how they are implementing the program. And so as a trickle-down effect, the district level representative that oversees the grant then notifies the site level administrator who ultimately is responsible for how that officer is being used on campus. Evaluations take place twice a year that are required by the grant. There are weekly logs that are gathered monthly that identify what that officer is doing on campus. Everything from home visits to police reports to extracurricular activities to time spent counseling with students and parents. And these are quantifiable numbers that can be utilized to evaluate how things are going. How is the officer being used on that particular campus? And the last thing I want to share before we head to any questions is an example of some of the restorative practices that I've seen have been beneficial. When I have an administrator come to me and say, hey, I need you to really get to this young person. Can you really put a scare in them? Can I use your taser? You got your handcuffs available? My automated response is no, no, no. That's not why we're here. That's not the purpose of the program. That's not the purpose of law enforcement. We are not individuals who come on a campus with the intent to be intimidating. We are individuals that are serving within our school communities to build positive relationships. And an example in that case is a situation in which some students decided that they were going to mess around during lunch. Some 8th graders. There was a big commercial light on the side of a building. And they thought, oh, I could touch it. And they just were competing. I could touch it. They were stepping up on the wall. And they were reaching up on the top and pulling down, reaching up on the top and pulling down. And as you would realize, crash. This commercial light, this $300 light goes smashing about. And my principal was very aware of the circumstances that these youth had. Thought, sending them home doesn't do any good. They're struggling in their classes academically. Officer do, what can you do? What abilities do you have? Well, I was a general contractor before. I could always, teach them a few things and we can straighten up some closets and, So during lunchtime, that's what they did. And with parent permission, they helped beautify their own campus. And part of the payback for them, part of the restitution that was agreed upon between the administration and the parents was to participate in this beautification of the campus for 4 days, 4 lunch periods. Myself and another staff member helped facilitate it. And at the end of those 4 days, I said, you guys, you've worked so hard. This is so great. I mean, it was wonderful working side by side with them, addressing some of the needs of the campus. They looked at me and they said, what are we doing tomorrow? And it developed into what was referred to as the urban assault team. Every day, they wanted a project. The attachment to their school community, the attendance increase, the academic success as a result of utilizing the skills of an individual, the resources available to us in that intervention. And it's just an example of how each of our SROs are utilizing their own skills to be a part of their school community and be the most positive influence, especially when it comes to authority figures. And it's consistent with 21st century policing and the procedural justice principles that I made reference to earlier. So I could go on and on about that, but I think if there's any questions or clarification, I'd love to be able to provide it or defer to the professionals.
All right, thank you very much. We have not very much time for questions, but if anybody would like to ask anything.
Laura, did you want to start?
You can go first. Go ahead.
I'm sorry, can you tell me your name one more time? I think I missed it.
Stephen Dew.
Steve, like D-E-W?
D-I-E-U.
Okay. I just want to make sure that I got it right. Sorry. Thank you so much for sharing your experiences. And so I don't want anybody to feel like I am being harsh or don't like anybody who is in this room right now. I could tell Officer Dew that it sounds like you're very passionate about what you do on campus, and I appreciate the stories that you shared. What do you do, though, with our students who are fearful of police? And, I don't know, are you wearing your gun and taser on your hip? You made reference to that earlier. But they're seeing things like Anthony Cano, who was gunned down last year by Chandler police, right? They're like seeing things on the news, right, with regards to relationships between police and unarmed people of color or people with disabilities. How do you overcome that?
One of the most powerful things is treating people with dignity and respect.
Mm-hmm.
For example, you've made reference to a family who lost a loved one.
Mm-hmm.
I had personal experience to be able to speak with his loved ones who go to Chandler High.
Mm-hmm.
Building relationships with those groups who feel like they might have been left out. Mrs. Black, who runs the student union at Chandler High. We've already discussed how we can collaborate, how we can provide a connection to that, to treat all with dignity and respect. Be transparent in the reason why we may have officers on campus. Convey trustworthy motives. Some of these concepts are things that continually are reminded in my mind when interacting with those who might have not so pleasant experience with law enforcement. And it's about building that bridge and being clear and transparent and treating others with dignity and respect. That's kind of where it starts out for me.
Mm-hmm. And I guess, oh, sorry, did you, go ahead.
Yeah, can I
Sorry.
please add to that?
Yeah, sure.
So part of the requirements that Officer Dew has mentioned about the school safety assessment and prevention team is when they meet, the requirement is that it's the SRO, a principal, and at least a counselor. And so there, if any situations like this arise, they can discuss that. And together they can talk about, there's going to be situations more than just the law side of it, that they need to reach out to have the counselors help, and they can help mitigate some of the problems that the campus has as far as the mental awareness that comes from situations like that.
Thank you. And then I do agree that we do need surveys. I wholeheartedly agree with that. Have we done any particular surveys? I know that you were talking about the reports that go to the Arizona Department of Education, but are those things that we can see? Just so, like, my thing is, like, is what we're doing, does it work? Because there's a lot out there about SRO programs and not meeting its stated agenda or objective, rather. And so I understand in talking with Dr. Gilbert that he feels that we do something different than other schools, but is what we're doing working?
So what I can say is, like, nationally, the Office of Justice has done a 19 school resource officer program study nationally. And then statewide, there's the U of A analyzed trained SROs and non-trained SROs, which I believe we had a few of our schools participate. Willis was one of those that I can remember that participated in that study. The Arizona Department of Education provided the results of that study, I want to say 2018, 2019. Each school is required to submit a competitive application which asks for data. It asks for how you're going to use your school resource officer specifically to your campus. So when the renewal process began 3 years ago, well, two and some change, when we just 2020, whenever that was, each campus had to provide this information and gather that data. And again, I made reference this upcoming years, that grant renewal process. And the Department of Ed, during that application process, reviews all the data and all the information that's being shared. And so that is something that I know is happening. In regards to surveys, it's really up to the district and that site level administrator who's responsible for administering the school safety program. So I hope that helps.
No, that's good. And I can add to that because of the site looking at what the need is and applying for that grant, that's what our principals are doing. They're gathering information, whether it's from teachers, whether it's from parents, so when we submit the grant, especially because we've had SROs for as long as I can remember when I was an assistant principal at Hamilton. And so I'm starting my 20-something this year, right? You can't tell because my hair is not as long as it used to be. But, we've always, especially when we've been able to have the grant, I think we've been fortunate that we have a number of our SROs on the state grant because we've been able to show how in Chandler and with Chandler PD, as well as with our partners in Gilbert and Queen Creek, how we're utilizing our SROs on our campus as being a collaborative team. And so we do surveys at the sites per their site of what they're looking for so that they can use that information to submit to the grant so we can show what we're doing on our campus and how we're trying to make sure that it's a positive situation.
Okay. And then like, and you know me, Dr. Gilbert, and you know my concerns, but like on the first page, we talk about feelings, right? So we talk about like, so that everybody in the school can feel safe, right? Or feel safe from the threat of harm. But we know that we have students who don't feel safe with officers, right? They don't feel safe, Officer Dew, he's got a gun on his hip and a taser right now. I'm not really, afraid of it because I know he's not going to use it on me tonight, right? But we have students who police violence is a part of their story, right? Whether they've seen it in their communities or experienced it themselves. So I guess like my question is like, whose safety are we prioritizing? Whose feelings of safety are we prioritizing in this?
Well, I think we have to move away from priority and look at safety for everyone because that's our focus. And I can share from personal experience. I didn't grow up to where every time I saw a police officer, I thought they were coming to help me. It was total opposite.
Mm-hmm.
So I understand that feeling that's out there. And the thing that we have to remember is we have a lot of students and families and people on our campuses that have fear of a number of things that we know about and we don't know about, right? Mm-hmm. And so one of the focuses that since I've been at the district level for 15 years and safety has been under my umbrella. And SROs falls under that. And that is how are we conducting ourselves as professionals? And I've been very fortunate in working with Chandler PD that has been a staple of our conversations and our collaboration. So if you don't have relationships or don't build relationships, that fear is always going to be there. It's going to take the openness of having conversations because we have things on our campuses that people want or don't want. We always have that, but we have to say, all right, what are some of the issues that some of our families or our students are having with some of the things that might be problematic for them on our campus and try to decide how can we work together. So that's where, and I've said this before in the last meeting that we had when we talked about our SROs is you have to build relationships. Relationships is the key to all of this. We can do everything else, but if there's no relationships that can build trust or at least give an inkling of, okay, maybe it's not as bad. I'm not saying everything's going to be all of a sudden, yes, we're great friends. No, it has to do with the respect. There's times where you may not care for someone, but there's a respect and understanding, and you don't have to be friends. So our whole focus has to be with our SROs on our campuses, which is why it's important. I can tell you, I don't know that everybody's MOU is going to have the information that Officer Dew read, because that's been a focus from day one, is that our SROs on our campuses are there to build relationships and be a positive influence on our campuses. And I will tell you that with the relationship that we've had with Chandler PD, if there's ever been an issue, it has never been a question. It is we are going to address it. But to go back to what you're sharing is, we know that we have students, we have families on our campuses of all races and walks of life that may have fear based on their growing up or based on interactions or based on what they've seen as it relates to law enforcement. So it's our job, because we have law enforcement on our campuses, to make sure that we allow them to be in a good light on our campus, which is why they're not the heavy on our campuses, which is why security addresses issues on our campus, which is why administrators deal with discipline. Our SROs do not. And so that is our responsibility, to work with our SROs and our families to build that bridge, as Officer Dew said, and building those relationships. Is that going to solve for everybody? It's not. Well, but it is our job to try and do that.
I think too, like what I heard, and I appreciate that Officer Dew shared this, is that he'll have, I'm assuming this is maybe teachers and administrators who have come to you or other SROs and asked if you could scare children, right? And that tells me that systemically we have a problem if we have teachers or administrators that think that that's appropriate to ask of Officer Dew or any other SRO.
Yeah, one of the things that is required through the school safety program, and what we do here in Chandler,
Yeah.
is establish an operational plan. And that operational plan had to be submitted with your grant application. That is how you're going to introduce that officer to your campus, how you're going to train your staff as to how the officer should be used appropriately as a prevention, as a resource.
Mm-hmm.
And so those individual situations happen, and there's an occasional reminder of, hey, you know what, I know it's an easy fix for me to come in there and help with a substitute that might have some classroom management issues, but that's not my role.
Mm-hmm.
That's not my role. And I see it even when, occasionally going into the grocery store in full uniform, and there's a parent having difficulty with a child and says, hey, you better knock it off or he's going to come get you. And I whisper with a sticker in my hand and hand it to the child and say, I'm not going to do anything. Because that, even outside of school, we want to follow those precepts and community policing efforts that we know are nationally recognized, state recognized, and work within our community. So even our patrol officers, we have a training for our patrol officers so that they have a better understanding of how officers conduct themselves in the schools. And that is very unique here in Chandler, so that we have a consistent approach and consistent interaction with our school communities, even if you're a patrol officer coming to like an elementary that might not have an officer.
So I wanted to just make mention that I lived here in Chandler my entire life, and I've had my 4 children go through the school district. And we would not allow our children to go to any campus that did not have an SRO and counselors and other individuals that try to create connections. And that's what the SRO program does. It helps create connections. When the SRO and the counselors and the principals, they work together and they find out how can we best serve not only the community, but the students, the parents. They get together and they address these situations so that they can create connections with the students. There's a reason why they're there. They're supposed to be on campus for 80% of the time. There's a reason why they have to teach 180 hours of LRE, because continued exposure to the SROs allows these kids to get an understanding of what they're there for. And it clearly is not there to scare them. It's clearly there to help educate them and help them to be very good citizens for the state of Arizona and for the United States.
Mm-hmm. I don't want to take any more time. I guess I can sit down and have conversations with you, Dr. Gilbert, and of course you guys individually, but thank you for presenting today and honoring this request. I think that a lot of the information was helpful.
All right, thank you guys. I think Laura might have a couple of questions.
Thank you. Thank you for this presentation. I believe that SROs are like the best way, the best opportunity that we have to build rapport between our law enforcement and our community at an age where you can make a difference. And I really appreciate all the work. I know it's a lot to write the grants and do the data and keep that all going, but it's such a valuable resource. I did have a few questions because I just want to make sure that what we're doing is, as oversight to make sure this is the way it should be, which I think the whole conversation has been about prevention and has been about building relationships, and I think that's super important. I would like to know what percentage of your time generally, obviously, it changes day to day, would involve like reactive activities to illegal activity on campus versus the proactive activities and the education.
So that's going to vary between school.
Mm-hmm.
So whether you're doing some preventative efforts or you're involved in some type of intervention, it's going to be specific to each campus. And some of that documentation and those numbers can be found in the monthly logs that are provided, that are kept on each campus. So to put an exact number it's going to vary between campus. So,
I think it'd be great if in some way we posted not all the details of all the monthly, events and things, but maybe yearly, just here's the general results of our surveys. Here's how our officers spent their time. Here's a sampling of some of the classes they went into: the criminal justice class, the health class, the government class, right? And just to communicate with the parents and the public about, like, what does this actually look like day to day? I think that'd be really helpful to bring the community on board with what's happening. And I guess my other question is, how does the district and the 3 different police departments, how do they work together to make the decision of who's going to be at what campus, what kind of training? Is it an individualized training where you see, okay, this officer maybe is a little bit introverted and we want him to reach out a little bit more, or this officer, she could use a little bit of help with learning how to communicate in the classroom when providing instruction? Like, what does that look like?
So when a needs assessment is completed on each campus, there may be a specific need that that officer could fill, or maybe there's a need for that officer to gain certain classroom skills, teaching skills. That would be something that would be evaluated in conjunction with their supervisor as well as the site administrator. That's done twice a year. And then that needs assessment is typically done anytime, usually at the beginning of a year and in anticipation of what is needed. And so officers will take specific training that they may be interested in, maybe they need, as well as curriculum-based training through the Department of Education based on the need of that school. And then I was just going to make a quick reference to your previous question. There is a yearly review that is done. So all those numbers you're talking about, what classrooms they're in, how they've used their time, there's actually a yearly review that's required to be submitted to the Department of Ed for the continuation of grant funding.
So maybe, I know it would take a little bit of time for someone, but if we can make like a 1 or 2 minute video or 1 or 2 slides of a PowerPoint, just not to give them, because most people are not going to read some comprehensive review, but just a way to reach out to the community. I think it'd be great if we could do it in a digestible way, for that site. So I realize that would take a little bit of time, but maybe it would be valuable.
We can do that. We can definitely do that.
Thank you. And lastly, I just wanted to ask about substance use in particular. Maybe my experiences are typical or not, over the last 3 decades of teaching, but it does seem like there's a lot of issues with that on campuses, and we spend a lot of time with that. What does that look like when a student, uses, THC in their vape or, whatever it might be on campus? How do we tie in the social worker? How do we tie in prevention specialists? Can you give me like a 30-second, what does that look like?
Absolutely. Okay, so what's unique to us in the Chandler School District and the Chandler Police Department is we believe that the first offense is something that can be handled within the school through the disciplinary process and diversion programs that are facilitated at each campus. We feel that's very effective. And the collaboration that happens with intervention specialists, for example, at Chandler High, where I'm at, we have an intervention specialist. I work with social worker and counselors, and it's a hand-in-hand collaboration that happens, whether it's communication personally or via email, as to what does that student need. And even looking at, are these, and I'm kind of letting the cat out of the bag a little bit, but even analyzing on our campus, what would it look like, or what do we have available to change things such as vapes or tobacco, or the wax pens? What would it look like if we had some other alternative than to send them home and suspend them? Could we do that? Do we have the resources? So there's an ongoing discussion of how we can further improve that. And I really feel looking at that and analyzing the data that's happening on each campus would be tremendous. And if there's district support in doing that, I'd be all ears.
Great.
To add to that, I think it's important is Mr. Serrano, Mr. James has actually been working and looking at content so that we can have some alternatives to suspension, whether it's vape and some other things, so that we're not sending students home. You know, like Officer Dew has stated, the nice piece that we have is the collaboration of how we're trying to address the issue that the student has. From my understanding and my background, when you're looking at students, whether it's vape, whether it's some type of substance, that's usually a symptom to a problem. So if all you deal with is just the symptom, you're never going to get to the problem. And that's been our focus of what we're trying to do within the district.
Right. Thanks.
One more thing on the evaluation piece. The principals are in charge of their school. And if the principal feels that there's a need or there's an issue with the SRO, whether it's personalities or whatever the case may be, we meet with their sergeant at least twice a year. And personally, in 22 years that I've been at the school, there's been times we've switched SROs. It's because of whether the personality, we just didn't think it fit in that school. So that has happened. So that's another avenue that we have as far as evaluation.
And I think that's important, which just shows the collaboration. You know, I've talked to different officers depending on what's going on, just because we have that relationship of we're all trying to do the same thing, and that is to keep our schools safe, to make sure that our families know that we're trying to keep our schools safe, our students safe, and our officers on our campus is a resource. If we're done, I would like to add one thing if I could, and I don't usually talk too much about this, but I mentioned earlier that, you know, where I grew up, I will tell you, when I saw a police officer, I was more in fear than I was that they were coming to help me. But I can tell you what changed my thought, or which moved me to look at it a different way, was an SRO. It was actually an SRO that I befriended him and got to know that changed my perspective. That's not going to be for everybody, but I'm just saying it. But you have to be open to look at it. But it's a two-way street. It's how the professional and how the officer is approaching you, and how you're open to whatever that's going to look like. So I think that's very important, which is why I bring up that safety has been under my umbrella since I've been up here at the district office, because I have an expectation as to what it's going to look like on our campuses and how our students and our families are treated, not just by the SRO, but by our principals and our staff. And so that's why if things come up where there's an issue, we need to know about it so that we can address it.
Does that translate though to every department though? Because this presentation has been like very heavy Chandler PD focus. I'm assuming Officer Dew, I can't see very well, but I'm assuming you're Chandler police officer.
Yes.
But like,
I can tell you,
yeah.
I can tell you for Chandler Unified.
Mhm.
So when I'm speaking, and I know that we're talking with Chandler PD, but I can tell you from Chandler Unified, with the two SROs that we have from Gilbert at Perry and Payne, and our SRO that's at Castile that just switched, who was our SRO when he was with the Sheriff's Department, same thing. Because we have the same expectation for all of our SROs at all of our schools, regardless of the municipality. And fortunately, because of our relationship, there hasn't been any issue of the expectations that we have. Because again, it's our schools, our campuses, but we can work together and set those expectations. And it has been with all of the municipalities we work with.
All right, thank you. I have a question, but Joel, I was going to give you a chance to ask anything you want to inquire about.
No, I'm good. I'm good. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So my question is probably a little bit easier. The SRO, I know we have security at games on the Friday nights and everything. Are the SROs part of that team? Are they? What other things do they do?
So one of the things that we found to be very valuable is when we have those extra events that are happening and we got to hire security, is that we collaborate within our school resource officer unit. So for example, it is very common, Rick Cole at Anderson, he's a school resource officer over there. He's one of my permanent guys that comes over to Chandler High, and he works for us during those events. And it's that consistent relationship that is very valuable, even in those type of settings. And it's great to see his kids that have moved on to Chandler High, high-five him, and so happy to greet him because of the relationship he has built with them at Anderson Junior High. So we utilize our SRO unit to fill those spots, and then take a look at officers that are a good fit for those events. And I can't think of any that I've thought, they're not a good fit. Those that want to work with kids, put in for those assignments, but the initial responsibility falls on the school resource officer unit.
Okay, that's all I had. Frank, do you have anything to ask about?
No, I want to thank you all for a great presentation tonight, but I do want to make a couple of comments. And I think you hit it right on the head with relationships, and relationships are formed by individuals and populations being together, and you can't form that relationship if you're not. And I've never known anybody that's been separate that relation is formed and that things move forward. So I want to thank you for that. I do want to thank you also for a couple of things. Our municipalities are very responsive, both Chandler, Queen Creek and Gilbert. And I know there's strong collaborations with administration, and you guys are first to come to the table to talk about progressions that we need to make. So we do appreciate everything that you put into it as well. And I want to thank our other officers that are that are here tonight to also support that. But one of the big things that I can say in my 40 years of education is I wished we had opportunities like this, because this is a model. It is a model. We do know that there's districts and across the nation that have problems. We know that. We see it. We see it on the news. We realize it in some of the data. As this program started years ago, and I'm going to bring up something you guys are going to go, the DARE program, really, Frank, you're bringing that up tonight. But it was a program that started those relationships early in a child's life, and they were positive. And I had those in multiple districts I worked with, Sunnyside, Tucson Unified, and then also here. I saw those programs the strongest here because the relationship was, again, built upon. But what I see happening with SROs here is quite different than what I've seen anywhere else, because that model of policing is really a collaborative model, and it's not an enforcement model as much, even though I know you have to enforce certain things. You are a police officer first. But I do appreciate the fact that you go into a collaborative union, or at least a relationship, so that the kids will trust, but not only trust and respect, because that's earned, but that they see that modeled on campus, because that is such an important factor. And the other thing I want to say is to people that might be over you and maybe over your employment here, is we'd love for you to come and sing in our talent show in April. CUSD is putting together its first inaugural talent show of its staff. It'll be at the Chandler Arts Center, and I've heard you sing the Star Spangled Banner. You have an amazing voice, and I am encouraging you to come and grace us with your voice. And board members, we'll give you an invitation to hear this talent show of our folks, but we'd love to have you there too, because you are a type of officer, which I know many of our officers do. You invest your time in children, and I want to thank you for that.
All right, great. Thanks, guys. That'll wrap up this part of the study session. Our next one's going to start with Dr. Fletcher, and we're going to take a couple of minute break and then come right back. As soon as you're ready, Dr. Fletcher.
All right, good evening, members of the board. Dr. Jennifer Fletcher, Executive Director of Accountability Assessment and Research. Bear with me for a super thrilling presentation on our A through F letter grade models. To be clear, there are no letter grades yet. We're going to discuss and learn about the models today so that when it comes time for a letter grade presentation, I don't have to wait in suspense to show you what it looks like and then get to the letter grades. There are three particular models: a K-8 letter grade model, that is for our elementary and junior high schools, a 9-12 letter grade model for our high schools, and then what the state refers to as a non-typical model, which is for us, schools that serve 7-12 like Basha and Castile, or our grades 1 through 12 COA, Chandler Online Academy. A little bit of information just for you about the letter grade models. They are owned by the State Board of Education. Okay, so the State Board runs the letter grade model. They work in tandem with the Arizona Department of Education. They are the ones who have the data, right? We submit all of our data up to the Arizona Department of Education. They provide modeling, and then they involve what's called an Accountability Technical Advisory Committee, which includes members, stakeholders from districts, charters, Arizona nonprofits that are appointed by the State Board of Education to review the models, provide a recommendation to the State Board of Education so that the State Board of Ed can make educated choices based on actual data impact. If you ever have suggestions or questions, I am one of those who is appointed to the ATAC, the Technical Advisory Committee, so I am on that for Chandler to represent us and help ensure we have a fair and equitable model for our schools. Okay, there are a lot of acronyms in A through F, so I have an acronym slide. I provided you a paper copy of that so you could refer to it throughout the presentation because I know it's really hard to follow when we're all using different acronyms. First and foremost, I'm going to point out the biggest one that's the most important for this entire presentation is that first one, full academic year, which is referred to as FAE. Most of, probably 90% of the accountability models only include students that are full academic year. This is done out of fairness to our schools. We want to ensure that we are rewarding or penalizing, right, for only the students they've had for the majority portion of the school day, and I'll tell you those definitions here momentarily. The rest of the acronyms are related to assessments predominantly, or if you see AOI, that refers to Arizona Online Instruction. Those are our online schools, so for us that refers to COA, Chandler Online Academy. Okay, we're going to start with the K-8 model. Again, there are different school configurations that fall within the K-8 model. For us, we have a K-5, Anderson L, we have our K-6s, we have our 6-8, we have our 7-8, okay? You'll see in the model 50% of the total points are on growth, 30% on proficiency, 10% on what's called acceleration readiness, and 10% on EL proficiency and growth. When the models were designed, the State Board of Education believed it was really important for KA students to be focused on growth rather than proficiency. So when we get to the 9-12 model, you'll see a shift in the percentages related to growth. Okay, important terms and definitions. All right, again, bear with me, this is super technical. Please, if you have questions along the way, I'm open to stopping so we can clarify anything that may be confusing. All right, so for your K-8 model, we have 3 FAE definitions. The first is what's called a 1-year full academic year. So students must be enrolled within the school within the first 10 calendar days and continuously enrolled until the first weekday in May. All right, so recall we're working on last year's letter grades, so that was May 2nd. Students who are enrolled continuously in the same school for 2 consecutive years are considered 2-year FAE. The same applies to 3-year FAE, and I'll get to why that becomes important here momentarily. And then obviously for our EL, our English learner students, they take the AZELA test. And so there is an AZELA FAE definition, which is slightly different, first 10 days of the school's calendar, and continuously enrolled until the last day of the AZELA testing window. Because our Chandler Online Academy reports attendance differently, right? They do minutes. You'll see in that box that FAE is calculated based on a percentage of minutes at every grade level. Okay, proficiency is worth 30%. It is capped at 30 points. I know that might seem obvious, but it's actually not. This does not impact our schools, but you are required to have a minimum of 10 full academic year students. That's out of fairness. Proficiency is using our grades 3 through 8, ELA and math, AASA and MSAA assessments. That's our statewide assessment. And then there are 4 performance levels or achievement levels which are weighted accordingly. So you'll see if you are a minimally proficient student, you are worth 0 points. If you are partially proficient, you're worth 0.6. If you are proficient, right, because that's the goal is to get our students to proficiency, you're worth 1 point. If you're highly proficient, you're worth 1.3 points. Hence why there is a cap of 30, because if everyone was highly proficient, you could earn greater than 30 points.
Can I just ask,
Yep.
so why would they give less value to partially proficient than what they add on to highly proficient? Is there like some kind of mathematical reason, statistical? They just kind of pulled it out of thin air?
I wish I could tell you there was
Okay.
a real mathematical reason behind it. It was pretty arbitrary. They wanted, I mean, the nutshell is they wanted to reward that you're making some movement towards proficiency, but yeah, it's a good question. Okay, so not ignore, but you don't have to focus on this crazy formula here. Essentially, what happens at the K-8 model is there are two ways to calculate proficiency. The first is you take all FAE students and you treat them the same way. All right, so you take your number of FAE students who are partially proficient and you multiply that by the 0.6. You take your number of FAE students who are proficient, multiply it by 1. You take the number of highly proficient students, multiply it by 1.3. You divide by the total number of students who tested, and you have your proficiency percentage multiplied by 100. Okay, that's your total points earned. I know, I told you.
Okay. I have to ask a silly question.
Yep.
What test are these people taking?
This is our AASA and MSA statewide assessment in English language arts and math.
Okay.
Yep. Okay, so that's the first model. You basically add up the students in each category, multiply by their weighting, right, on this chart, divide them by the total number, and you get a percentage proficient. There's an alternative model here that they refer to as the stability model, which assumes that if a student is continuously enrolled with you for multiple years, they should therefore be doing better because they've had more stability, right? So if you look at this chart and you look across that 3 years row, you'll see that the student who is 3 years FAE is worth 15 of the 30 total points. 2-year FAE is worth 10. 1-year FAE is worth 5. So they do that same calculation, but multiply it by the FAE weightings to see which proficiency points are higher, the top one or the bottom. And then the schools can earn whichever is higher. Yeah. Okay, with me so far? All right. Now, what? Barely? Maybe? Okay. I know. We, if you recall the prior letter grade system, it was a lot less complicated. Yes, it was. Okay, so now by law, we are required to test all of our students, right, on the statewide assessment. That is a mandate. However, the state recognizes it's unlikely you're going to meet 100% proficiency participation. So they allow us to meet a threshold of 95%. If you do not meet your 95% tested, you will be penalized. And the way you will be penalized is they are going to add into the denominator the number of students you needed to get to 95%. So let's say you had 100 students, you tested 90. You needed to test 95. So what you're going to do is you're going to take those 5 students, right, 95 minus 90, they're going to add them into the denominator. And if you recall about fractions, when you increase the denominator, that's going to decrease your proficiency percentage points. Yep. This is improved, though, because the prior letter grade model dinged you an entire letter grade. All right, so this is not as harsh as we used to have. Growth at K-8 is worth 50%. Okay, right now, we have what's called student growth percentile. 25% ELA, 25% math. What student growth percentile does is it takes every individual student in the state and it compares that student to their entire peer group. So students who had the exact same scores as them on all the tests, and it says it's going to rank them on a percentile, 0 to 100, and say, okay, in this peer group, how did you perform? 100 being you outperformed all of your peers, right? 0 being everyone else outperformed you. Okay, and so what they do is they do that by ELA and math. We get a percentile. And then they compare that percentile, so your level of growth, to your performance level in the prior year. So let's start, if you look at that table, if you look at minimally proficient students who get a percentile of high growth, which is defined as 67 to 99 percentile, you are worth 2 points because you made the maximum amount of growth to reach proficiency. And then you can see it scales back accordingly. And then you take all of those cells and you multiply that by the number of students in those categories, right, in each cell, add them up, and that determines your growth points. All right, EL proficiency and growth is worth 10%. 5% is on proficiency. 5% is on growth. This is similar to the other proficiency calculation, but is focused on strictly our English learners, right, and their Azella assessment. The only way to be proficient on the Azella, though, is to test proficient or what we call reclassify, right? So you take all of your students who tested proficient divided by the number of students with an EL need, not just students who are being served in a program. We, by law, are required to manage and ensure that all of our students are reaching proficiency, whether they are in a program or parent withdrawn. So every student with an EL need is your denominator, and that determines your EL proficiency percentage. Now, the complicated piece of EL proficiency is you'll see all these beautiful green highlights here. In order to determine how many points each school is going to earn, we have to compare to the state's EL proficiency percentage, which at this time we do not know. So while A through F letter grade models are relatively stable, you never really know what the target is. So we won't know how many points our schools earn until they publish this manual with the data results. All right, EL growth, again, worth 5%. You have to have 2 test scores to be included in growth calculations. This is similar to what we saw in AASA and MSAA for growth, right? Essentially, the more growth you make as a student, the more points you are worth. So you'll see on the bottom, your pre-emergent, emergent students who went within 1 year to proficient are worth the most. That's an immense growth for an English learner. You add each cell multiplied by the number of students, divide again by your total number of students with an EL need to determine the school's growth percentage. And then you wait for the state to tell you how many points you can earn. Okay, acceleration readiness is worth 10%. When the board designed this, the intent was to try to get away from test scores because everything thus far is based on a single day of testing, right? So their intent was to create a menu of options for schools, only 2 of which don't include test data, but allow schools to earn points in a variety of ways. So you can see that there are 5 components to the acceleration readiness that we'll go through. The first is for grade 8 full academic year math performance. You can earn 0, 2.5, or 5 points. Essentially, what your objective is to increase your percentage of students who are highly proficient and or decrease your percentage of students who are minimally proficient. Right? So you're just going to compare a prior year percentage to a current year. You can see on the bottom table that if you were greater than the prior year, you earn 2.5 points, or if you were lower, reduced it, right, then you earn 2.5 points. This is similar to another menu option, grade 3 full academic year minimally proficient related to English language arts, right? This is our move and when reading target. We're trying to reduce the number of our grade 3 students who are minimally proficient. That's the overall objective. So again, we compare a current year percentage to a prior year percentage to determine whether you earn 5 points, or in this case, 0. There's no 2.5 on this one. You can also earn the 5 points simply by meeting a 12% threshold. Obviously, for like ACP middle school, who is a 6-8, they don't have access, right, to the grade 3 menu in acceleration option. Likewise, our K5 Anderson L doesn't have access to the grade 8. So that's part of why the inclusion of the multiple metrics. One important metric in our acceleration readiness is chronic absenteeism. This is one of the only indicators. It's not based on test data. It's also the only indicator that is not based on full academic year. So this takes all of your students, regardless of whether they were enrolled 1 day or 100 days. It does not matter. And it looks at, do they have absences, whether they're excused or unexcused, doesn't matter, greater than 10%. If it's greater than 10%, they are considered chronically absent. And then in that box, you'll see, because COA, Chandler Online Academy, reports minutes, there is a different calculation for how you do chronically absent by minutes. So points are earned by comparing your current year to your prior year. In this case, when I say current year, I really mean prior year and prior year, prior year, right? Because it's last year's motto. So you can earn 2 points if you saw a reduction, or you can earn 2 points if your chronically absent threshold is less than that 4%. So again, establishing a threshold. Subgroup improvement is included on here because it is part of federal accountability. So subgroups are very important to the federal accountability models. You'll see the list of subgroups on here. You can earn up to 6 points total. There are 13 subgroups times 2 subjects, English language arts and math. So in essence, a school could earn probably almost half of their total points on the model if they allowed, but they did not. They capped this at 6 points. What you do is you calculate that proficiency percentage using that same formula as we did before. For every subgroup, you compare prior year to current year, and you determine are points awarded. If you make an increase, you earn 2 points. If you do not, you don't earn any points. The final element of acceleration readiness is special education inclusion. Again, this is another metric not based on test results. The objective is to reward schools that have greater than the state average of special education students in general education classrooms at least 80% of the day. Again, we don't know what that number is, so we don't know until the year is over and they've published the data to know whether our schools earn those points or not. There are also bonus points available. Special education enrollment is worth 2 bonus points. So schools with high populations of full academic year students enrolled in special education can earn up to 2 bonus points, again, based on the statewide average. So we wait to see what the statewide average is. This was intentionally added because when the models were being designed, they thought there would be an unfair advantage to schools that don't serve special education populations. So there is at least the available opportunity for 2 points. Science proficiency is worth 0, 1.5, or 3 points. Yay, this is exciting. It's the first year it's proficiency. It's been participation in the past. So that's a big shift and exciting movement for the state. You must test 95% of your students on AZ-Sci in grades 5 and or 8, depending on your school. And compared to the state performance, you can earn up to 3 bonus points. You'll notice a lot of TBDs on this presentation. Okay, so the state calculates all of the points. They provide the underlying data. You'll know everything had a minimum of 10 for FAE, right? We do have 5 elementary schools and 2 junior highs that don't meet the Azella FAE 10. So those schools would only be out of 90 total points. Everyone else would be out of 100 points. They'll add each of the points plus the bonus points to determine your letter grade, which is TBD. We expect, as of this moment in time, the state board to review an initial preview of the cut scores in September. They must approve them in October because the state law says letter grades have to be out by November 1st. So that is the current working timeline. Questions about K-8? We'll go a little quicker through 9-12 because a lot of the calculations are the same, just a slightly different model. So 30% proficiency here and only 20% growth. The state expects by the time you get to high school, you are proficient. That is the overarching objective. 20% college and career readiness, 20% on graduation rate, and again, 10% on EL proficiency and growth. Same definitions, except there's no 1, 2, 3 in high school. We recognize there's more mobility in high school, so there's only a 1-year full academic year definition. It is still the same within the first 10 days of the school's calendar, continuously enrolled until May 2nd. Similarly, a Zella full academic year is the same. And then for our online institution COA, they are based on percentage of minutes logged. All right, proficiency, worth 30 points. This test is our grade 11. Last year was the first year for ACT, and then our grade 11 MSAA on ELA and math. The state did administer ACT Aspire grade 9, but they have not done any standard setting or any analysis on that data, so it is not yet included in our letter grade models. Same calculations, Same requirement to meet 95% tested, total the points out of 30 points total. Growth is 20%, same calculation at K8, student growth percentile is used. That's your peer group, creating a percentile. In this case, because ACT was the first time offered last year, they are going to compare the students' grade 10 on AZM2 to their grade 11 ACT score. Moving forward, it will eventually become grade 9 to grade 11 growth, but we're not there yet. Okay, same weighting scale, multiply by the number of students in each cell, add them up, your growth points out of 20. EL proficiency and growth, same calculations, 5% on English learner proficiency. We don't know how many points anybody is going to earn because we have to wait on the state data. Same with the growth. And if I'm moving too fast, just let me know. Still got to wait on the state for the growth. I feel like a broken record up here. Okay, something new. Graduation rate is worth 20%. All right, so 10% goes to your 4, 5, 6, and 7-year cohort calculation. All right, this was done intentionally to make sure schools are held accountable to students beyond just the 4-year cohort. But you'll see in that upper right-hand table, the 4-year cohort is worth the most, 5% out of the 10%, and then the decreasing scale on the 5, 6, and 7. We still would like to make sure students are graduating regardless of if they take a couple extra years or not, right? So you take your cohort grad rate and you multiply it by the 0.05, the 5%, and you add them up to earn total points out of 10. There is also a graduation improvement calculation worth 10%. The goal is strictly focused on your 4-year cohort to maintain a 90% graduation rate or to increase from the prior year. So you'll see points are awarded 0, 5, or 10, depending on your level of growth or not, or your maintained level. Okay, if you thought it was complicated before, buckle up. All right, College and Career Ready is a self-reported data that is done by myself and my research team. We compile all the district's data for every school, and I manually enter it for ADE into a system. It requires 10 students in the cohort, not full academic year, just 10 students in the cohort who were sort of full academic year. They were like half academic year. October 1, continuously enrolled until May, right? So a slightly different definition. There are 23 available points out of 20. All right, yeah, I know. So here's where it gets fun. What the State Board of Education did is they designed a board of blue and reds. Blue is college ready, red is career ready, and said, so let me go to it for a minute and then I'll come back. All of these different measures we assign to a blue or a red, and then we give them each a point value. So if you look at that first one on the left, if you earn a Grand Canyon diploma or an International Baccalaureate diploma, you can earn 1.25 points on the blue or the college ready scale. All right? So what we do at a district level is we take all of the data for every student and we tabulate how many points they earn on blue and how many points they earn on red.
I have a
Yes.
question. You said you picked 10 people from the school or from the whole district? Or?
No, you just have to have a minimum of 10 students in the
Okay.
cohort to be included.
Okay.
Yep. So for us, that's not a problem. We need a minimum of 10. So we use all students in the cohort, but for super small schools in the state that might not have 10, they are not eligible for these 20 points. All right, so we take each student, we determine how many points they earn on blue and red. And then if you look at the bottom of this slide here, that tells us how many points on the college and career ready metric they are worth. So if you earn 1 point of red or blue, you're worth 10 points out of 20, okay? If you earn 2 points of red or blue, you're worth the full 20 points. If you are both 1 point red and 1 point blue, meaning you're both college and career ready, you are worth 22 points. So in essence, the board is trying to tell schools, try to get your students to be both college and career ready. They are worth the most amount of points. All right, that's the objective here that was designed. Then there is the opportunity for a bonus point that gets us to the cap of 23 if you increase your post-secondary enrollment and your military enrollment compared to the prior year. All right, so far. So we do this at a student level. We determine their number of college points, red and their or blue, and their red points career. We total each student's points, 10, 20, or 22. We divide by the number of students in that cohort, and that gives us a total number of points out of 20 that our schools can earn. And then I manually report that to the state for inclusion in the letter grade. So again, the intention here was not based on one day of test data, although you'll look at these, many of them are test scores, right? But to allow schools more opportunity to earn points that's not just based on one day of testing. And then again, the K-8, I'm sorry, the 9-12 model has bonus points, special education enrollment, same as K-8 is worth up to 2 points, weighting on a state average. Science proficiency, that should say grade 11. For grade 11 can earn up to 3 bonus points. ACT Aspire, so that was that new assessment for grade 9 students, is only based on participation this year. So you can earn points based on your participation compared to the state, TBD. And then points are totaled for every category. And we still don't know what those categories mean. That is what the state will vote on at the October board meeting. The final model is what's called our non-typical model. So our BASHA, our Castile, and our COA, our Chandler Online Academy. Essentially what they do is they take the proportion of students in each K-8 setting or 9-12 setting, multiply their total points by that proportion to determine how many points would they earn overall. So there's an example there. You'll see 80 points out of 100 were earned where 60% of the students are enrolled versus 70 points where only 40% of the students are enrolled. And we're just taking the proportion of those, adding on the bonus points to determine their overall letter grade so that they can have an overall letter grade. This will be the first year in almost a decade where the district will also earn a letter grade. Historically, the district letter grade used the exact same models of student aggregated data, but last year the State Board of Education voted to go to almost like a GPA weighting system. So all of the schools will earn a letter grade. You'll see that an A is worth a 4.0, right? Not surprising, a B a 3.0. You will take all of our schools and their GPA, add them up, divide by the total number of schools, and that will determine the district letter grade. If it is above 3.5, the district earns an A, and so on. Yeah, that's how we feel. Questions? I confused you so much you don't know what to ask.
No, I have 2 questions. Number one, if people in schools are just giving higher letter grades to students, wouldn't that just make the district letter grade go up?
Well, not necessarily because it's based on their test results. So.
Oh, it's not on. Okay, it's not.
Yeah,
on
this is based on their actual.
It says GPA, so I was.
Yep, based on their actual letter grade from the state. Yeah,
Okay.
not the actual. But they have that opportunity in the college and career ready, self-reporting. We don't know what other people report, and
That was the
it's
second
an honor-
question. Yeah.
It's an honor system.
Okay. Yep. Does anybody else have any questions?
You know I do. All right. So when you were talking about graduation rate and absenteeism, especially for high school students, so when we see that a student has more than 10% of the semester absent, oftentimes they are withdrawn. Maybe they go to COA, maybe they go to Hill, maybe they're out of school. What does that look like for the state? So for example, we want to increase graduation rates, which makes us want to allow them to stay longer than the 10 or 11 absences per semester, right? And it's almost like these two things are vying against each other to maintain those points. And then also, what does it look like if they transfer to COA or to Hill? Like, whose data, do they not get counted then? Because it's not a full year?
Correct.
Okay.
Yep. So it's kind of contradictory goals at times, right? So when they designed the letter grade model, they did it with the best intentions, but we all know there's no perfect system in place. But yeah, so if they move schools, then they wouldn't be considered full academic year at that second school, and they're not included in the letter grade model unless it's chronic absenteeism or graduation rate.
Okay.
Yeah. So they're still gonna unfortunately get held accountable to that student.
And then students that go to EVIT, what does that look like?
The program, so our students are reported at their home schools, so they're held accountable at that home school.
Okay. So do the grades they earn at EVIT affect, or not
If they're
grades,
testing,
but
Yep.
so all those other variables that weren't testing, that's only at the home school? Okay. And then this may overlap with Dr. Marshall a little bit, but so for students with special needs, it's kind of pushing you to want to make them A's, right? To make them 80% or higher. I know that least restrictive environment is a goal that we have, but do we feel any kind of pressure to kind of bump the kids that are kind of close to bump them up to the 80%? Like, is that part of it, or how do we prevent these kind of incentives from influencing what we think is best for each individual student?
That is a great question, because typically, you're right, the state does look at our percentages of our students in that level of service A, meaning an hour or less away from their typical peers. And we are provided what's called a PEA determination, and that score, they look at our percentage of our students that are in that least restrictive environment category. We are really taking a very hard look at what those services are and to make sure that they're skill-based. And we always want to start with the general education setting first, but you're right, at the end of the day, it must be done based upon the student's unique needs. And right now, Chandler is sitting right at about 70% of our students are in the least restrictive environment and in the general education setting for the 80% or more of their day. So it's exciting that our percentages have gone up because we're doing more inclusive practices and partnering with our general education colleagues.
It just worries me because there's this pressure on us to make it this way, but if it really is best for the student to maybe have 2 hours of resource class, or to have that study skills class plus, the one resource class or whatever, it just worries me a little bit that they're kind of de-incentivizing what's best for the student.
Correct.
Absolutely.
But anyway.
The one
Correct.
good thing I would say is you won't know what your 80% is because you don't know how many students are in there till the end of the year. So it's not like on a day-by-day basis you can go in and say, oh, we're already at 80%, or oh, we're 79%, let's push that child in, because it's based on a full year's worth of data. So it's not really like there's a day-to-day indicator that's telling you yes or no.
And I was just curious if you had and you may not have an answer for this, but my last question is, how many staff hours do we dedicate to giving all this data, collecting the data, organizing the data, sending it off to the state, making sure it's in the right format? Like, what does this require us to spend?
Honestly,
And how many hours?
right now it's not terrible because it's an automated system.
Okay.
But how long it took to build was probably extensive. But once we get data sets in, we import them into our system and they flow right in and the calculations happen automatically. But I imagine it was a hefty lift years ago when they designed this to build it.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
All right, Lindsay, do you have any questions?
I'm trying to figure out how to ask this, but I guess give me a better understanding of slide 20 for the acceleration readiness for subgroup improvement.
Okay, so it's the same proficiency calculation, just done by every subgroup. So kind of like we do for board metrics. If you think about 1D, we do proficiency, a target of 60% by every subgroup. That's exactly what the state is doing, just without a target. And they're doing it for ELA and they're doing it for math. So when we see the data, they show us subgroup ELA percent proficient, current year, prior year, and you're just looking to see, is there an increase of proficiency percentage for every subgroup by subject?
Okay.
Does that help?
It does. It does. It's just because this is all based off of like test scores.
Yep.
But like some of these groups, you know, these test scores are going to come out different because like we know that tests are biased. So
Yep.
it's just, I see what they're doing, but I don't like it.
It is a hard model because it is predominantly based on one day of testing. It absolutely is.
Yeah. But that's not a critique of you. I love you.
No, you're fine. I know. And I worked at AD. I was the person that oversaw the design of the letter grade models when this went through, and I had to present to all of the committee every 2 weeks on data without being able to say recommendations. And it's hard to design a model that meets everyone's needs and is fair and equitable without using test data, and they really struggled.
Yeah. And it's hard because it's like if we look at some of these subgroups too, like homeless and foster care, there's some systemic issues that, you know, as we know, as a district, we can support, but it's more than just us doing the lift.
And it's not a cohort analysis, it's just a year over year. So
Yeah.
it's even potentially a different population of students, as well as a different level of assessment bands that are required to be met to define proficiency. So yeah, there are limitations to the current model.
Thank you.
Okay. Joel, did you have any questions for Dr. Fletcher?
Yeah, just one minor question. So you talked about if absences were greater than 10 days.
Yes, chronic absenteeism,
What? Yes. So
10%.
back in the day, yeah, way back in the day, if you could prove it was created by an epidemic in a sense like flu, then they would exclude that. Does that apply in this case?
No longer does that apply.
Okay, thank you.
And Joel, it's 10% of time or 18 days, and that's how the state defines chronic absenteeism as well.
I know, but if you had the widespread illness thing, you would exclude the 10.
Yeah,
but anyway.
no
Okay.
longer applies.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Since this is a study session, we could let anybody that's in the room go up to the mic and ask a question if anybody would like to.
Hi there, I have a question. Can you go back to the high school slide where you describe the tests that are used? The standardized tests?
The ACT, that one?
Yeah, so it's the ACT? Who decides that the ACT is the test to be used in high school?
The Arizona Department of Education.
It's not up to the district or each
No.
school?
No.
Okay, thank you.
But that did used to be an option, right? And
It
it's
used
changed
to be
now.
a menu option, it
So
has changed. They have selected ACT as their assessment.
Okay, I interrupted your thought, Frank. Well,
No, actually, I just want to say thanks to Dr. Fletcher because I know the time is running here. But it's important for our board and for the public to understand there's multiple ways that we have to calculate letter grades. We have a K-8 model, we have the high school model. We also have a model that includes schools that have partial junior highs and high schools on the same campus. So once this gets calculated, you can see the complexity of how you earn points, how you don't earn points, how your subgroups are calculated, and then the principals at the schools, while testing is occurring, have the same complexities of making sure they have the right percentage of kids tested in each one of the subgroups. Otherwise, those count against the school too. And so even though it's very complex and although it's automated, what most principals will do at sites is they'll get their letter grade and then it's kind of like knowing the answer to a problem sometimes. If you know the answer to the problem, you'll go back and maybe it might make sense how that problem was resolved. At least that's what usually happened to me in algebra. I needed the answer to go back and find out how to do it, a couple of good models. But our principals backtrack and see where they got their bonus points, where they felt their students were deficient, and then go ahead and plan towards that. But it takes multiple elements and multiple points. It's not a simple grade. There are multiple aspects of how they earn their grade and then how the district earns the grade as well. So it's quite complex, but the subgroup data is the thing that we really rely on in our metrics as well, and that translates to our metrics too, to make sure our subgroup data is moving forward.
Jason, I do have another question.
Go ahead, Joel.
In the past, it seemed like there were situations where it's impossible to get an A or impossible to get an F. Is that going to exist in this new system? For example, if you were in a lower economic area, in the old days, it was basically you couldn't get an A. So I guess my question is there any adjustments for that?
That is a really good question, and as a member of the Technical Advisory Committee, I will see the first draft of cut scores next Monday. I will not be at liberty to share them, but we will know more once the state and State Board of Ed and the Arizona Department of Ed present what they're thinking for their cut score models. Anything is game at this point, to be honest.
And if I can add, Dr. Fletcher, Joel, you're correct that in the model, there are more opportunities to not get an A than there are to get an A. Certain demographics will predict who the A schools are, and there'll be certain demographics of a school district or a school that will depict their grade. But there are many more chances to get a lower grade than an A.
So with this new model, equity and SEL are going to be extremely important.
Agreed. I wish I knew more. Unfortunately, a lot of this is driven by the State Board of Education and what their expectations are. I know at this point in time, there is a hope to present 2 cut score models. One is the old 2019 model, apply it and see how it works. The other is to use what's called a standard deviation calculation. So you take the average points, that defines a C. You move up 1 standard deviation, right? The points in between become the B, move up 2 standard deviations, that's an A. So I know those are the 2 models that they're gonna look at, but then what they do is analysis by urban, rural, right? School type, school size, to see if there's equity across that.
All right. Does anybody else have any more questions? If not, then we can wrap up our study session, and then we'll open the board meeting right at 7 o'clock then.
Thank you.